The rattling of the iron horse pierced the Montana twilight as Emma Randall pressed her forehead against the smudged train window, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like hungry wolves. 3 years a widow, 30 years alive, and a lifetime of judgment heaped upon her shoulders for sins that weren't her own. Whiteridge, a place she'd never been, a town where nobody knew her name or the scandal that had driven her from Boston. At least, that's what she prayed. The train lurched to a halt, belching steam into the crisp autumn air of 1883. Emma gathered her meager possessions, one trunk, one carpet bag, and a letter promising employment at the town's only hotel. She'd been a teacher once, back when her name meant something respectable, before Franklin had gambled away their future and left her with nothing but his debts and a ruined reputation. "Last stop, Whiteridge," the conductor called. Emma stepped down onto the wooden platform, her high-buttoned boots landing in a thin layer of dust. The station was little more than a wooden shack with a telegraph office attached. The town itself stretched before her, a main street flanked by wooden buildings, some painted and proper, others weathered to a silvery gray. Nothing like Boston, with its cobblestone streets and gaslights. "Miss Randall?" A round-faced woman approached, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a practical bonnet. "I'm Mrs. Holloway from the Whiteridge Hotel. Mr. Holloway sent me to fetch you." "Thank you for meeting me," Emma replied, trying to hide her fatigue. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Well, we need the help, and you come with references." Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly. "Though they're rather vague about your previous employment." Emma's heart skipped. "I assure you, Mrs. Holloway, I'm a hard worker." "We'll see. The hotel needs a housekeeper who can manage the rooms and help with meals. It's not easy work." "I don't mind hard work," Emma said, following Mrs. Holloway toward a wagon. "It's honest." Unlike what people had whispered about her in Boston, that she'd turned to unspeakable means to pay her late husband's debts. The rumors had been false, but mud stuck, especially to a woman alone. The hotel was a 3-story wooden structure with a wide porch and freshly painted trim. Inside, the lobby was small but clean, with a polished wooden counter and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Mr. Holloway, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous manner, barely looked up from his ledger as his wife introduced Emma. "Room's upstairs, last door on the left," he said. "Be down at 5 tomorrow morning to help with breakfast." Emma nodded, taking the small brass key Mrs. Holloway handed her. Her room was little more than a closet with a narrow bed, washstand, and hook for her few dresses, but it was clean and private. She sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment of relief. Here, in this dusty corner of Montana territory, she could be just Emma Randall, widow and housekeeper, not the woman who'd been shunned in Boston society. Dawn came early, and with it the demands of her new position. Emma worked methodically, changing linens, scrubbing floors, and helping Mrs. Holloway prepare meals for the hotel's guests, mostly traveling salesmen and the occasional rancher in town for supplies. Whiteridge, she discovered, existed primarily to serve the sprawling cattle ranches that surrounded it. The town boasted a general store, a saloon, a small church, a bank, the hotel, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. People nodded politely when introduced, but asked few questions, which suited Emma perfectly. For 2 weeks she kept to herself, speaking only when necessary and returning to her tiny room after her duties were complete. She was careful to avoid the saloon and the rowdier elements that frequented it, especially on Saturday nights when the cowboys rode in from the surrounding ranches. It was on such a Saturday, as Emma hurried back from the general store with supplies for the hotel kitchen, that fate intervened. A group of cowboys emerged from the saloon, laughing and jostling one another. Emma lowered her head and quickened her pace, clutching her parcels tighter. "Well, look what we have here," one of them called out. "The new hotel girl." Emma kept walking, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm talking to you, madam," the man persisted, stepping into her path. His breath reeked of whiskey, his eyes glassy with drink. "Folks say you're from back east. Too good to talk to us ranch hands?" "Excuse me, sir. I need to return to the hotel," Emma said firmly. attempting to step around him. He blocked her path again. "Maybe you need someone to show you how we welcome pretty ladies to Whiteridge." "That'll do, Hank." The voice was deep, authoritative, and came from behind Emma. She turned to see a tall man approaching, his stride purposeful. He wore the dust of the trail and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Just having a friendly conversation, Marshall," Hank muttered, taking a step back. "Miss Randall isn't interested in your particular brand of friendship," the newcomer said evenly. "Why don't you head back inside before you say something you'll regret come morning?" Hank glanced between Emma and the man called Marshall, then shrugged and rejoined his companions, who were already drifting back toward the saloon. "Thank you," Emma said, adjusting her grip on her packages. "Marshall Donovan," he introduced himself, removing his hat to reveal dark hair in need of a trim. His eyes were the color of the Montana sky, and crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often. "Foreman at the Double D Ranch, and you're the new housekeeper at Holloway's." "Emma Randall," she confirmed, surprised he knew who she was. "I should get back." "Allow me." He reached for her packages. "That's not necessary, Mr. Donovan." "Marshall," he corrected, "and it's no trouble. Those boys didn't mean any harm, but they can get rowdy after a week of pushing cattle." Reluctantly, Emma surrendered the heaviest of her parcels. "Do you know everyone in town, Mr. Donovan?" "Marshall," he reminded her again with a half-smile. "And yes, more or less. Whiteridge isn't exactly bustling with newcomers. When a pretty woman arrives alone on the evening train, people notice." Emma tensed. "What else do they notice?" His expression softened. "Nothing worth repeating. Folks here generally mind their own business." They walked in silence for a moment, Emma acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by. A respectable woman wouldn't be seen walking with a cowboy she'd just met, but she couldn't very well snatch her packages and run. "You're not from around these parts," Marshall observed as they approached the hotel. "Boston," she said shortly. "Long way from home." "This is home now." Emma stopped at the hotel steps. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Donovan. I can manage from here." He handed over her packages, studying her with those keen blue eyes. "You know, Miss Randall, not everyone in Whiteridge is like Hank. Some of us have manners." Despite herself, Emma felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "I'll keep that in mind." Marshall replaced his hat, touching the brim in a respectful gesture. "You do that. Good day, Miss Randall." Emma watched him walk away, his tall figure commanding attention even in the bustle of a Saturday afternoon. Then she turned and hurried inside, ignoring Mrs. Holloway's raised eyebrows at her delayed return. That night, as she prepared for bed, Emma found herself thinking of Marshall Donovan's easy confidence and direct gaze. He'd looked at her without the judgment she'd grown accustomed to in Boston, without the speculation or pity. It was refreshing. Dangerous, but refreshing. She wouldn't see him again, she told herself firmly. Whiteridge was just a stopping place, somewhere to earn enough money to perhaps move on to a larger town where she might resume teaching. Getting involved with the locals, especially a cowboy, wasn't part of her plan. Life, however, had other ideas. 3 days later, as Emma was hanging freshly laundered sheets in the hotel's small yard, she heard the familiar voice. "Afternoon, Miss Randall." Marshall Donovan sat atop a handsome buckskin horse, looking every inch the ranch foreman in his work clothes and well-worn hat. "Mr. Donovan," she acknowledged, continuing her task. "I've brought some business for the Holloways," he explained, dismounting with fluid grace. "The ranch owner's wife is coming to town next week, and he wants to reserve the best room." "You'll want to speak with Mr. Holloway, then." "Already have." Marshall leaned against the fence, watching her work. "Thought I'd say hello while I was here." Emma pinned another sheet to the line. "Consider it said, Mr. Donovan." He chuckled, a warm sound that made something flutter in Emma's chest. "You're not much for conversation, are you, Miss Randall?" "I find it's better to keep to oneself in a new place." "That's so?" He reached for a sheet that had fallen to the ground, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed momentarily. "Seems lonely." "Lonely is safer than the alternative," she replied without thinking, then pressed her lips together, annoyed at herself for revealing even that much. Marshall's expression grew serious. Someone hurt you back east. It wasn't a question. Emma turned away, focusing on her task. My past is my own affair, Mr. Donovan. Fair enough. He straightened, dusting off his hands. But if you ever decide you want company for Sunday services or a walk down by the creek, you'll let me know. Emma looked at him in surprise. Are you courting me, Mr. Donovan? His smile returned, lighting his weather-tanned face. Just being neighborly, Miss Randall, for now. Before she could formulate a response, he tipped his hat, returned to his horse, and rode away, leaving Emma staring after him with the damp sheet forgotten in her hands. That evening, as Emma served dinner to the hotel's 4 current guests, she overheard snippets of conversation about the Double D Ranch. Biggest spread in the county, one traveling salesman told another. Old man Donovan started it 30 years ago with nothing but grit and a few head of cattle. His son runs it now, but they say it's the foreman who keeps the place going. That would be Marshall Donovan, no relation to the owner, the other replied. Heard he's the best horseman in 3 territories. Honest as the day is long, too. Emma kept her expression neutral as she refilled their coffee cups, but she stored the information away, annoyed at her own interest. For the next 2 weeks, she saw no sign of Marshall Donovan. She told herself it was a relief, even as she found her eyes drifting to every horseman who passed the hotel. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and the first threat of winter snows. Emma settled into a routine, finding unexpected contentment in the simplicity of her life in Whiteridge. The Holloways, while not warm, were fair employers. The townsfolk had begun to accept her presence, and a few of the local women had even invited her to join their sewing circle. She declined, still wary of forming attachments, but the invitation itself was a comfort. Then, on a blustery Tuesday morning, a familiar buckskin horse appeared outside the hotel, its rider stamping snow from his boots before entering. Emma, in the midst of sweeping the lobby floor, felt her pulse quicken. Morning, Miss Randall, Marshall greeted her, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. Turning into quite a day out there. Mr. Donovan, she replied, continuing her sweeping. What brings you to town in this weather? Supply run, he explained, removing his hat and gloves. And a letter for Mr. Holloway from the boss. Is he around? In his office. She nodded toward a door behind the reception desk. Shall I tell him you're here? If you would. Marshall remained where he was, watching her with those attentive blue eyes. You're looking well. Whiteridge must agree with you. Emma felt a blush rising to her cheeks and turned away to hide it. I'll fetch Mr. Holloway. When she returned with the hotel owner, Marshall was warming his hands by the lobby stove. He conducted his business quickly, then lingered as Mr. Holloway disappeared back into his office. Miss Randall, I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the cafe this evening, he said, his tone casual but his eyes intent. Weather permitting, of course. Emma's broom stilled. I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Donovan. Because you work here? Or because of something else? She met his gaze directly. Because I'm not looking to form attachments in Whiteridge. It's just dinner, he said gently. Not a marriage proposal. Even so. Marshall studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But the invitation remains open. He returned his hat to his head. Good day, Miss Randall. As he left, Emma fought the urge to call him back. She'd come to Whiteridge to escape her past, not to invite complications. And Marshall Donovan, with his direct gaze and quiet confidence, was definitely a complication. That night, as a full-blown blizzard descended on the town, Emma lay awake listening to the howl of the wind. She thought about Boston, about Franklin and his gambling debts, about the society matrons who'd turned their backs on her when she needed help most. She thought about the rumors that had followed her like a stain, growing more vicious with each retelling. And, against her better judgment, she thought about Marshall Donovan with his sky-blue eyes and the way he'd stepped in to help a woman he didn't even know. By morning, Whiteridge was blanketed in white. Emma rose early to help Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for the guests now stranded by the storm. As she placed plates of hotcakes on the dining room table, the front door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a half-frozen cowboy. "Mr. Donovan!" Emma exclaimed, hurrying forward. "What on earth—" "Got caught in the storm," Marshall explained through chattering teeth. "Was checking fence lines when it hit. Horse through a shoe. Had to walk the last 3 miles. Mr. Holloway appeared from the kitchen. "Get him by the fire, Emma. I'll fetch some blankets." Emma led Marshall to the lobby stove, noticing how he stumbled slightly. "You're frostbitten," she said, seeing the waxy white patches on his face and hands. "Just a touch," he managed, his normally strong voice weak. "Been through worse." "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, pulling a chair close to the stove. "Mrs. Holloway, we need hot water and towels." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as Emma and the Holloways worked to warm the half-frozen ranch foreman. His boots came off to reveal toes dangerously pale from cold, and Emma gently bathed them in lukewarm water, gradually increasing the temperature as circulation returned painfully to his extremities. "You're good at this," Marshall observed through gritted teeth as she tended to his frost-bitten hands. "I was married to a doctor," she said without thinking, then froze, realizing her slip. Marshall's eyes, cloudy with pain, focused on her face. "Was he a good one?" Emma resumed her ministrations, avoiding his gaze. "When he wasn't gambling away our savings or drinking himself into oblivion." "Yes." "Ah." Marshall winced as feeling returned to his fingers. "That explains some things." "Does it? Why you ran so far from Boston, why you flinch when a man raises his voice, why you're so determined to keep to yourself." Emma set down the basin, suddenly defensive. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Donovan." "I know you're brave," he said quietly. "I know you're competent and kind, even to a fool who gets himself caught in a blizzard. I know you're carrying hurts that weren't your fault." She stood abruptly. "You need rest. I'll have Mr. Holloway help you to a room." "Emma," he called softly as she turned to leave. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped her in her tracks. "Thank you." She nodded without turning around, then went to find Mr. Holloway, her heart hammering in her chest. The blizzard raged for 3 days, effectively cutting Whiteridge off from the surrounding ranches and settlements. Marshall remained at the hotel, recovering from his brush with the elements. Emma did her best to avoid being alone with him, but in a building the size of the Whiteridge Hotel, such encounters were inevitable. On the 3rd evening, as she was banking the fire in the dining room after the other guests had retired, Marshall appeared in the doorway. "Shouldn't you be resting?" she asked, keeping her focus on the fire. "Been resting for 3 days," he replied, moving into the room. His limp was less pronounced now, though the frostbite on his face was still healing. "Thought I might go mad staring at the same 4 walls." Emma straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, you should be able to return to the ranch tomorrow. The storm's finally passing." "So it is." Marshall took a seat at one of the dining tables, gesturing for her to join him. "Sit with me a while?" "I promise to be on my best behavior." Against her better judgment, Emma sat across from him. The dining room was dimly lit now, with only the fire and a single lamp providing illumination. It felt intimate, dangerous. "Tell me about Boston," Marshall said after a moment of silence. "There's nothing to tell." "I doubt that." His voice was gentle, coaxing. "What did you do there before you came west?" Emma hesitated, then decided a partial truth was safe enough. "I was a teacher, elementary school." "You miss it?" "Sometimes." She traced a pattern on the wooden tabletop. "I miss the children, the sense of purpose." Marshall nodded. "Why did you stop?" Emma's fingers stilled. "My husband died. There were circumstances that made it impossible for me to continue in that position." "His gambling debts?" "Partially." She looked up at him, challenge in her eyes. "Are you always this intrusive, Mr. Donovan?" "Only when something matters to me," he replied simply, holding her gaze. The air between them seemed to thicken. Emma stood abruptly. "I should retire. Mrs. Holloway will need help with breakfast early tomorrow." Marshall remained seated, his expression thoughtful. "You're running again, Emma," I'm being sensible, she corrected him, moving toward the door. Good night, Mr. Donovan. Marshall, he called after her. My name is Marshall, and I'm not your husband. I won't hurt you. Emma paused in the doorway, not looking back. Everyone says that. Until they do. The next morning brought clear skies and the resumption of normal life in Whiteridge. Marshall departed for the Double D Ranch with a promise to return the following week to settle his bill. Emma watched from the hotel window as he rode away, telling herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief, not regret. Winter settled over the Montana Territory with icy determination. Emma found herself busier than ever as the hotel became a haven for travelers caught between destinations during the cold months. She received a letter from her sister in Boston, her only remaining family, full of news about people Emma had once known and now tried to forget. One paragraph, however, caught her attention. I thought you should know that Mrs. Peabody and her daughter have left for Europe. The scandal following Amelia's broken engagement to Thomas Wellington has made their position in society untenable. How quickly fortunes change. One day they were snubbing you for Franklin's indiscretions, and the next they themselves are outcasts. I wonder if they now understand how cruelly they behave toward you. Emma folded the letter carefully, thinking of Amelia Peabody's cutting remarks and her mother's dismissive sniffs. They had been among the worst when the rumors started, implying that Emma must have known about Franklin's gambling and perhaps even encouraged more sordid behaviors to pay his debts. Bad news from home? Emma started, turning to find Marshall Donovan standing in the hotel lobby, snow melting from his hat and coat. She hadn't seen him in nearly 3 weeks. Not bad, she said, tucking the letter into her pocket. Just reminders of things I'd rather forget. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I've come to settle my bill from my unexpected stay. Is Mr. Holloway available? He's gone to Billings for supplies, Emma explained, moving behind the reception desk. Mrs. Holloway is visiting her sister, who's ill. I can help you with your bill. She calculated the amount owed, acutely aware of Marshall watching her as she worked. The lobby was empty, save for the two of them, the afternoon light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Will you have dinner with me, Emma? He asked as she handed him his receipt. At the cafe tonight. No expectations, just a meal and conversation. She opened her mouth to refuse, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the earnestness in his expression or the memory of his words. I'm not your husband. I won't hurt you. Yes, she heard herself say, I have the evening free. The surprise and pleasure that transformed his face made something warm unfurl in Emma's chest. I'll call for you at 6, he said. Emma spent more time than she cared to admit preparing for dinner. She owned only 3 dresses besides her work clothes, none particularly fashionable by Boston standards, but the best was a deep blue wool with a lace collar that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. She pinned her honey brown hair in a simple but elegant knot and allowed herself a touch of her precious rose water. This is not a courtship, she reminded her reflection. It's just dinner with a friend. Marshall arrived promptly at 6, cleanly shaven and wearing a suit that, while not new, was well tailored to his broad shoulders. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. You look beautiful, Emma, he said simply. The cafe was the only real restaurant in Whiteridge, a small establishment run by a French-Canadian couple who had brought a touch of culinary sophistication to the frontier town. Marshall had reserved a table near the fireplace, and the proprietor himself brought them wine, a rare luxury this far from civilization. To new beginnings, Marshall proposed, raising his glass. Emma hesitated, then touched her glass to his. To fresh starts. Conversation flowed more easily than Emma had anticipated. Marshall spoke of growing up in Colorado, the son of a silver miner who'd lost everything in the panic of '73. He'd made his way north, working as a ranch hand before landing at the Double D, where his way with horses and cattle had quickly earned him the position of foreman. The owner's son is a good man, but he's got no head for the practical side of ranching, Marshall explained. He handles the business end while I manage the day-to-day operations. You enjoy it, Emma observed. I do. There's something honest about working the land, about seeing the seasons change and knowing you've helped something grow. He studied her over the rim of his glass. But I suspect you understand that, being a teacher. It's not so different, she agreed. Watching young minds develop, helping shape their futures. I miss it. Why can't you teach here? Marshall asked. Whiteridge has a school, and from what I hear, the current teacher is eager to retire. Emma shook her head. It's not that simple. I left Boston under difficult circumstances. If the school board were to inquire, your husband's debts, Marshall said, but surely that wasn't your fault. Emma stared into her wine glass. People rarely make that distinction, especially when a woman is involved. There were rumors, ugly ones. Marshall's hand covered hers on the table. Emma, look at me. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. Whatever happened in Boston, it doesn't define you here. Whiteridge isn't Boston society. People here judge you by your actions, not your past. If only that were true, she said softly. It can be, he insisted. Give it a chance. Give yourself a chance. The earnestness in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. Before she could respond, the proprietor arrived with their meal venison stew with fresh bread, and the moment passed. As they ate, Marshall steered the conversation to lighter topics, the upcoming Christmas celebrations, the antics of a litter of kittens born in the livery stable, the traveling theater company rumored to be visiting in the spring. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn in by Marshall's easy charm and genuine interest in her opinions. Thank you for this, she said as they finished dessert, a rich apple tart with cinnamon. I haven't enjoyed an evening so much in a very long time. The pleasure was mine, Marshall replied, his eyes warm in the firelight. Though I hope it won't be our last dinner together. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Donovan. Marshall, he corrected gently. Marshall, she conceded. I don't know what you expect from me, but I should be clear. I'm not looking for complications in my life. Is that what I am? A complication? There was no offense in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Potentially, she admitted. I came to Whiteridge to start fresh, to find peace. And you think I'd disturb that peace? Emma met his gaze directly. I think you already have. A slow smile spread across his face. Good. Good? She echoed, incredulous. Emma, peace is wonderful, but life, real life, isn't always peaceful. It's messy and complicated and sometimes difficult, but it can also be joyful and surprising and worth every moment of uncertainty. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking for a chance to know you better, and for you to know me. Emma felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she'd built so carefully around her heart. I could consider that. His smile widened. That's all I'm asking for. He escorted her back to the hotel, the night air crisp and cold around them. Stars glittered overhead in a cloudless sky, and their breath formed little clouds of vapor as they walked. At the hotel steps, Marshall paused. Thank you for a lovely evening, Emma, he said formally, though his eyes held warmth. Thank you for inviting me, she replied, suddenly shy. He took her gloved hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to a Boston drawing room than a frontier town. Until next time. As Emma watched him walk away, snow crunching beneath his boots, she realized she was looking forward to that next time with an eagerness that should have frightened her. December brought more snow and the festive atmosphere of approaching Christmas. Emma helped decorate the hotel with pine boughs and red ribbons, and even agreed to attend the town's Christmas social with Mrs. Holloway. Marshall continued to call at the hotel, sometimes with legitimate business, sometimes with transparent excuses. They shared 2 more dinners at the cafe, a Sunday service at the small church, and a sleigh ride organized by the town's social committee. Each encounter left Emma more conflicted, drawn to Marshall's steady strength and gentle humor, yet still fearful of opening herself to potential hurt. A week before Christmas, as Emma was arranging holly on the hotel mantelpiece, the door opened to admit not Marshall, but an elegantly dressed woman who looked distinctly out of place in the frontier setting. She was perhaps 40, with carefully styled dark hair and an expensive traveling ensemble that spoke of Eastern wealth. "I'm looking for Emma Randall," the woman announced to the empty lobby, her voice cultured but cold. Emma turned slowly, recognition and dread washing over her. "Mrs. Wellington," the woman's gaze fixed on her, sharp with disapproval. "So it is you. I hardly recognized you in such rustic surroundings." Emma descended from her step-stool, smoothing her plain work dress. "What brings you to Whiteridge, Mrs. Wellington? You're a long way from Boston." "My son is establishing business connections in the territories," Mrs. Wellington explained, removing her gloves with precise movements. "Imagine my surprise when I heard that Franklin Randall's widow was working as a hotel maid in this settlement." "Housekeeper," Emma corrected, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thomas Wellington had been one of Franklin's gambling companions, and his mother one of Emma's most vicious critics after Franklin's death. "How may I help you, Mrs. Wellington?" The older woman's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "I thought the good people of Whiteridge might be interested to know exactly what kind of woman they've welcomed into their community." Emma went very still. "I've done nothing wrong here or in Boston." "Perhaps not technically," Mrs. Wellington conceded, "but a woman whose husband died under such suspicious circumstances, who was rumored to have entertained gentlemen to pay his debts." She let the implication hang in the air. "Those were lies," Emma said, her voice tight with suppressed anger, "spread by people like you who needed someone to blame for your son's own gambling losses." Mrs. Wellington's eyes narrowed. "Be that as it may, I doubt the respectable citizens of Whiteridge would be comfortable with such a woman teaching their children." Emma's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, I heard about your application to the school board." Mrs. Wellington smiled again, that same cold curve of lips. Small towns and their gossip not so different from Boston after all. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She had indeed applied for the teaching position, encouraged by Marshall's faith in her. The interviews had gone well, and she'd begun to hope. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing at all," Mrs. Wellington replied, pulling her gloves back on. "I merely thought you should know that I'll be in town for several weeks. My son and I are staying at the new hotel in Billings, but we'll be visiting Whiteridge frequently." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Give my regards to your cowboy friend. Marshall Donovan, isn't it? I understand he's quite respected here. It would be a shame if his reputation were tarnished by association." With that parting shot, she swept out into the snowy street, leaving Emma trembling with a toxic mixture of rage and fear. That evening, when Marshall called to escort her to the town's Christmas concert, Emma refused to see him. She sent Mrs. Holloway with a message that she was unwell, then huddled in her small room, trying to decide what to do. Mrs. Wellington's threat hung over her like a sword. Emma had no doubt the woman would follow through, poisoning the town against her just as she'd done in Boston. And this time, it wouldn't only be Emma who suffered. Marshall's position at the Double D depended on his reputation. She wouldn't be the cause of his ruin. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would leave Whiteridge before Mrs. Wellington could spread her venomous half-truths. The thought brought a physical ache to her chest, but she saw no alternative. She was packing her trunk when a knock came at her door. Expecting Mrs. Holloway, she called, "Come in." Instead, Marshall's tall form filled the doorway. His expression, usually so warm when he looked at her, was troubled. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Emma turned back to her packing. "It's for the best." "Best for whom?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Emma, talk to me. What happened? Yesterday you were looking forward to the Christmas concert, and now you're running away." "I'm not running," she protested weakly. "Aren't you?" Marshall moved closer, gently taking the shirtwaist from her hands and setting it aside. Mrs. Holloway said a fancy lady from back east visited you yesterday. Who was she? Emma sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted. Mrs. Wellington, the mother of one of Franklin's gambling friends. She threatened to tell everyone about the rumors from Boston. And you believed her? You think people here would turn on you because of some Eastern society woman's gossip? They would if she tells it convincingly enough, Emma said bitterly. You don't understand how these things work, Marshall. She's wealthy, respected. People listen to women like her. I listen to the woman I know, he said firmly, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. The woman who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who treats everyone with kindness, who helped save my life during the blizzard. That's the Emma Randall I believe in. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. It's not just about me. She threatened you too. Said your reputation would be tarnished by association with me. Marshall's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. My reputation can withstand a few rumors, Emma. I'm more concerned about you giving up everything you've built here because you're afraid. Of course I'm afraid, the words burst from her. I lost everything once already. My husband, my home, my career, my good name all gone because of Franklin's mistakes and people's cruelty. I can't go through that again, Marshall. I can't. You won't have to go through it alone this time. He took her hands in his. Emma, when I was lost in that blizzard, thinking I might freeze to death, do you know what kept me going? The thought of seeing you again, of having one more chance to make you smile, to hear your laugh. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't say things like that. Why not? Because it frightens you to hear them, or because you're afraid they might be true. Because I'm not worth it, she whispered, the words torn from some deep, wounded place inside her. No one wants a woman with my past, my reputation. I'm used goods, Marshall. His expression shifted from concern to something fiercer, more determined. Then I'll use my heart to heal you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Emma, I don't care what happened in Boston. I care about who you are now, here, with me. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded despite herself. His hands cupped her face with exquisite tenderness, as if she were something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Emma pressed her forehead against his. I'm so scared, she admitted. I know, he murmured, stroking her hair. But we'll face it together, all of it. Whatever Mrs. Wellington says or does, we'll handle it as a team. Just don't run, Emma, please. She pulled back slightly to study his face, the earnestness in those blue eyes, the firm set of his jaw, the gentle curve of his lips that had just kissed her with such care. You really believe we can do this? I do, he said simply. Do you trust me enough to try? It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked her. Trust had been broken for Emma so many times by Franklin, by society, by those who should have supported her. And yet, looking at Marshall, she found herself wanting to believe again. Yes, she whispered. I'll try. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. That's my brave girl. The next week passed in a blur of Christmas preparations and growing tension as Emma waited for Mrs. Wellington to make her move. Marshall was a constant presence, escorting Emma to town events and making no secret of his regard for her. Some eyebrows were raised at the open courtship, but most of the townsfolk seemed more amused than scandalized. 3 days before Christmas, the school board called Emma in for a final interview. She went with trepidation, certain that Mrs. Wellington had already poisoned them against her. To her surprise, the board members were cordial, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching philosophy and experience. As the interview concluded, the board chairman, a silver-haired rancher named Peterson, fixed her with a direct gaze. Miss Randall, we've received some concerning correspondence about your time in Boston. Emma's heart sank, but she forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. I assumed you might, Mr. Peterson. Care to address it?" Taking a deep breath, Emma told them the truth, all of it. Franklin's gambling, his suicide, the debts he'd left, the rumors that had followed her. She spoke calmly, without excuses or embellishment. "I left Boston because I could no longer teach there, not with the cloud of suspicion over me," she concluded. "But I've never done anything to be ashamed of, and I'm a good teacher. I can provide references from my former headmaster if you wish." Peterson exchanged glances with the other board members, then nodded. "That won't be necessary, Miss Randall. We've already contacted your former school. The headmaster spoke very highly of you." Emma blinked in surprise. "You reached out to Boston?" "Of course," Peterson said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We do our due diligence when hiring teachers. I believe in hearing all sides of a story before making judgments." Hope fluttered in Emma's chest. "And Mrs. Wellington's letter." Peterson's weathered face creased in a smile. "Let's just say we take the word of a Boston society matron with a grain of salt out here in the territories, especially when it contradicts what we can see with our own eyes." Emma left the schoolhouse in a daze of relief and gratitude. Marshall was waiting for her, leaning against a hitching post with forced casualness. "Well?" he asked as she approached. In answer, she flung her arms around his neck, heedless of who might see. "They're giving me the position," she said against his shoulder, "starting after the new year." Marshall's arms tightened around her. "I knew they would," he murmured into her hair. "They'd be fools not to." That night, at the town's Christmas social in the church hall, Emma walked in on Marshall's arm, wearing her blue dress and a smile that felt almost foreign after so many months of careful reserve. Mrs. Wellington was there, on the arm of a young man who must be her son Thomas. Her eyes widened at the sight of Emma and Marshall together. "Ignore her," Marshall murmured as they passed the Wellingtons. "She can't hurt you anymore." "Miss Randall," Mrs. Wellington called, her voice carrying across the decorated hall. "How unexpected to see you here, and in such company." The room quieted slightly as people turned to observe the exchange. Emma felt a moment of panic, then drew strength from Marshall's steady presence at her side. "Mrs. Wellington," she acknowledged with a polite nod, "I hope you're enjoying your visit to our town." "Our town?" Mrs. Wellington echoed with a raised eyebrow. "How quickly you've adopted this place." "Whiteridge has been very welcoming," Emma replied evenly. "More so than some other communities I've known." Mrs. Wellington's eyes narrowed. "Yes, well, some communities have standards." "As does Whiteridge," Marshall interjected, his voice pleasant but firm. "Standards that value hard work, honesty, and judging people by their actions rather than by gossip." "Mr. Donovan, isn't it?" Mrs. Wellington turned her cold gaze to him. "I wonder if you know the full history of your companion." "I know everything I need to know about Miss Randall," Marshall replied, "including how she's been mistreated by those who should have shown more Christian charity." Several of the townsfolk had moved closer, openly listening now. Emma felt herself tensing for the inevitable public humiliation. "I agree with Mr. Donovan," came a new voice. Emma turned to see Mrs. Peterson, the board chairman's wife, and one of the town's most respected matrons. "Miss Randall has proven herself a valuable member of our community, and we're delighted that she'll be teaching our children come January." Mrs. Wellington blinked, clearly thrown by this unexpected support. "You can't possibly understand." "I understand perfectly," Mrs. Peterson interrupted with steel beneath her gentle tone. "I understand that you've traveled a very long way to spread unpleasantness about a woman who has done you no harm. In Whiteridge, Mrs. Wellington, we consider that poor manners." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled townsfolk. Emma felt Marshall's arm slip around her waist, a gesture of both support and subtle possession. "Mrs." Wellington's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Come, Thomas," she snapped to her son. "Clearly this event is beneath our standards." With a final glare at Emma, she swept toward the exit, her son following in her wake. As the door closed behind them, the tension in the room dissolved into relieved laughter and renewed conversation. Mrs. Peterson patted Emma's arm kindly. Don't give her another thought, my dear. We take care of our own in Whiteridge. Our own. The words wrapped around Emma like a warm blanket. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she truly felt that she belonged. The Christmas social continued with music, dancing, and an abundance of food contributed by the townsfolk. Marshall proved to be an accomplished dancer, guiding Emma through waltzes and reels with easy grace. As midnight approached, he led her outside, where the clear winter sky blazed with stars and their breath created clouds of vapor in the cold air. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he said softly, producing a small package from his coat pocket. "I know it's a few days early, but I couldn't wait." Emma took the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It was my mother's," Marshall explained as he helped her fasten it around her neck. "One of the few things that survived our many moves." "Marshall, I can't accept this," she protested, though her fingers touched the locket reverently. "You can," he insisted, "because it comes with a question." He took her hands in his expression serious in the starlight. "Emma Randall, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Will you marry me?" Emma's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead at double speed. "Marshall, are you sure? After everything with Mrs. Wellington, the rumors—" "I've never been more sure of anything," he interrupted gently. "The question is, are you brave enough to say yes?" Emma looked up at this man who had broken through her defenses, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and still wanted her, who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." Marshall's face lit with joy as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down for a kiss that left her breathless and laughing. "When?" he asked against her lips. "How soon can you be Mrs. Donovan?" "After the school year," she suggested. "June, perhaps? That would give us time to prepare, and for the town to get used to the idea of their new teacher being a married woman." Marshall grinned. "June it is, though that's a long time to wait." "We have the rest of our lives," Emma reminded him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I'm not going anywhere." And she meant it. For the first time since Franklin's death, Emma was looking forward, not back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Marshall by her side. The wedding took place on a perfect June day in 1884, with wildflowers decorating the little Whiteridge church and nearly the entire town in attendance. Emma wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, with the silver locket her only jewelry. Marshall, handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Mr. Holloway's arm. Mrs. Wellington had long since returned to Boston, her attempts to discredit Emma thoroughly rebuffed by the Whiteridge community. Emma had completed her first term as the town's teacher to universal acclaim, her natural gift for education winning over even the most skeptical parents. As they exchanged vows, Emma looked into Marshall's blue eyes and saw her future, bright, secure, and filled with love. The wounded woman who had arrived in Whiteridge less than a year ago, certain that no one could want her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth and who had found a man worthy of her trust. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Donovan, you may kiss your bride." As Marshall's lips met hers, sealing their vows with a kiss both tender and passionate, Emma felt the last pieces of her broken heart mend. She had found more than a haven in Whiteridge. She had found home. The reception was held at the Double D Ranch, where Marshall had built a cozy cabin for them on a rise overlooking a creek. Owner's permission had been granted readily, along with a substantial wedding gift partial ownership of the ranch, recognizing Marshall's years of loyal service. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light, Marshall drew Emma away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood tree. "Happy, Mrs. Donovan?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she replied honestly, leaning into his embrace. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself. Never, he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. I told you I'd use my heart to heal you, and I meant it, every day for the rest of our lives. Emma turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. My heart is healing yours too, she said softly. We are healing each other. As the stars appeared overhead and the sounds of celebration drifted through the summer night, Marshall kissed his wife with all the love and promise of their new beginning. The past, with its pain and uncertainties, was finally behind them, and the future, their future, stretched ahead, as vast and full of possibility as the Montana sky. 5 years later, Emma sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Marshall taught their 4-year-old son Michael to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Catherine played nearby, arranging pebbles in careful patterns on the porch steps. The Double D had prospered under Marshall's partial ownership, and Emma continued to teach at the Whiteridge school, though now only part-time since the children had arrived. Their life wasn't without challenges: droughts, harsh winters, the ordinary difficulties of frontier living. But they faced each one together, their bond stronger for every obstacle overcome. Sometimes Emma thought about Boston, about the life she'd fled in shame and fear. She'd received word that Mrs. Wellington had died the previous winter, her son having gambled away most of their fortune in speculative mining ventures. There was a certain poetic justice in that, though Emma found she could no longer summon bitterness toward the woman who had inadvertently sent her toward her true destiny. "Mama, look!" Michael called as his pony trotted in a small circle, his father walking alongside with a lead rope. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Emma called back, pride swelling in her chest. "You're doing wonderfully." Marshall glanced up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her heart skip. After 5 years of marriage, their love had only deepened, tempered by shared joys and sorrows, into something enduring and unshakable. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Marshall's fingers traced lazy patterns on Emma's bare shoulder. "I received a letter from the cattle buyers in Chicago today," he murmured. "They want to increase their order for next season. If the weather holds, it could mean a significant profit." "That's wonderful news," Emma replied, nestling closer to his warmth. "We could use some of it to expand the school. We're getting more families settling here every month." Marshall chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "Always thinking of your students." "They're the future of Whiteridge," she said simply. "Our children are the future of Whiteridge," he corrected gently. "At least part of it." Emma smiled in the darkness. "Speaking of our children, do you think Michael is ready for a real saddle of his own? He's becoming quite the horseman." "Like father, like son," Marshall said with pride. "We'll see about a saddle for his birthday." "Maybe Catherine will be interested in riding too." "Catherine is interested in everything," Emma laughed softly. "She's going to be a handful as she gets older." "Good thing she has such a patient mother, then." Emma turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a woman with so much baggage?" Marshall's arms tightened around her. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You're the best decision I ever made, Emma Donovan. Don't you ever doubt it." "I don't," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest above his heart. "Not anymore." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate woman who had stepped off a train in Whiteridge, certain that no one could want her, to the beloved wife, mother, and teacher she had become, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. The cowboy had kept his promise. He had used his heart to heal her, and in doing so had given her a life filled with more love and purpose than she'd ever dreamed possible. And Emma, in turn, had healed him, showing him that loving deeply was worth every risk. Together, they had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past, a family, a home, A future as boundless as the Montana sky that stretched above their sleeping household, studded with stars that seemed to whisper promises of even brighter tomorrows to come.